Hello, I am incredibly excited to share with you my Qullamaggie deep dive. This is something I've put my heart and soul into for the last few months, so I hope you find it useful. Before we begin, just a quick note on what this is and isn't. This presentation is a short introduction to some of my findings from my Qullamaggie deep dive. I will also walk you through the data I have used, how I gathered it, and some of the other projects I am working on. The deep dive has to a large extent reinforced and lent credence to all the information Qullamaggie has made public already. It has helped me a lot in developing as a trader and changed my trading in a huge way. I hope it can do so for you as well. Just a quick note on the background for the deep dive. You may ask, why not just watch Qullamaggie's streams and read his website? The answer is simple, because he literally tells us that's not what he recommends. He specifically tells us to question everything and to build our own conviction. And that is what I have done. And I hope this will help you in the right direction as well. This deep dive is not a silver bullet which will make you profitable overnight. But I hope this short presentation can give you some ideas and inspiration. The data I have collected and analyzed is not some holy grail, but it is the type of deep dive and resource I wish I had available when I first started out as a trader. But remember, it's you who have to put in the work if you want to improve. Watching yet another video is not enough. So, let's get to it. I want to quickly walk you through what this presentation will cover. It will touch briefly on some of the findings from my own deep dive, like Qullamaggie's approach to position sizing, when he enters the majority of his trades, how quickly he adds and cuts exposure, and a few other things. I will not go into great detail, as that's something I expect you will want to do on your own, but hopefully enough to give you some ideas and thoughts on how you can use the data. I will also talk about the methods I use to gather this data. A lot of people has commented on the credibility of it, and I want to show you what an insane effort and attention to detail was required to get it all. And then finally, I will tell you a little about what other projects I am working on, and how you can do a similar deep dive. So, before we begin, let me say something briefly about the data. The data has been gathered from Qullamaggie himself, either through his tweets or through his streams. I have collected and analyzed 3,128 tweets and over 700 hours of his streams. Based on this, we have data for 1,060 positions with exact position size and cost price. We also have the approximate entry for 1,524 positions between 2019 and 2022. It's a lot of trades. And the cool thing is that they are from different periods of his career, and all of his setups are included. More specifically, 846 positions are from 2014, 1,057 positions are from 2017, and 1,524 trades are from 2019 to 2022. Please note that the data referenced here for 2014 to 2017 are positions, not entries. Also note that I have access to many more trades. But due to how I have collected the data, I have included a conservative data set in this presentation to ensure the integrity and quality of the data. I will address this later in the presentation. So, let's look at these periods in a little more detail. Qullamaggie has had insane returns every year since he became profitable. And for the periods we have data from, he had 646 and 414% returns for 2014 and 2017. And for 2019 to 2022, he had cumulative returns of over 2,000%. Now, what's interesting is to look at some of the differences in his trading style between these periods. For example, in 2014, he mainly day traded, and around 50% of his trades were shorts, compared to 2017, where he was mainly long and almost exclusively swing traded. As for 2019 to 2022, that can be one of the things you find out for yourself using the data I have made available. Categorizing and labeling his trades has been a very valuable exercise for me. So what is interesting is that I have found that even though he trades on different time frames, he follows the same core principles with respect to position sizing, risk management, and so on. We will discuss this later. Also, just a quick note. The graph I show here shows the cumulative profits, which is different than his account size. You can see this in detail in one of the Excel files. So, let's look at Kullamägi's position sizing. If you review one of his streams or check out his Discord, you will find that 99% of what is being discussed is setups, and maybe how they act in different markets. One of the more undercommunicated things is his position sizing, and on the rare occasion he discusses it, it's easy to misinterpret what he says. On stream, he has said that small accounts shouldn't have more than 4 to 5 positions when they are fully invested, and that his own position sizing varies between 5 to 25%. So, what I find interesting is that even though Kullamägi says that studying charts and learning setups is the easy part, and that position sizing is the hard part, most people spend almost all their time studying charts. I know from my own personal experience that I took Kullamägi's recommendation of having max 4 positions at face value. It has resulted in me having paid a lot of market tuition because most of my trades has been sized way too big. So, let's look at some stats from Kullamägi's own trades. Based on 977 positions held in 2014 and 2017, you can see that most of his positions are less than 15%. One of the things that surprised me is the amount of small positions he has. But this makes sense when you think about the fact that he sells some of his positions into strength. Another interesting finding is how differently he sizes his shorts versus longs. His shorts are consistently larger than his longs, and I suspect that is because he can more easily add to these positions on VWAP pullbacks, and that he often has higher conviction on some of these. Another finding is how much more consistent his sizing was in 2017 compared to in 2014. Even adjusting for the fact that around 50% of his trades in 2014 were shorts, he shows clear signs of having reduced his average position size. So we can't look at position sizing in isolation. Dynamic position sizing is directly correlated to his risk, so let's look at his typical risk-reward profile. To do so, I first looked at his account gains and account losses on 976 trades between 2014 and 2017. The initial observation is that most of his trades are pretty clustered around 0, meaning that most trades doesn't make huge movements in his account. Then there are some outliers on the right side, meaning that he has some winners that run. And this makes sense. So let's zoom in a little. What we see then is pretty interesting, and I was personally astonished when I first saw this. 7 out of 10 trades had a risk less than 0.25%, and 9 out of 10 trades had risk less than 0.75%. This is interesting, because we keep hearing that you should risk 1% of your account on each trade, and combine this with the recommendation of having max 4 positions, and we are pretty much doomed to bust our accounts. Another observation is that the vast majority of his trades doesn't make huge impact on his account, but then he has a few trades which moves his account significantly. So let's compare 2014 and 2017. As you can see, his returns on each trade in 2017 was a lot more consistent, whereas in 2014 his returns were a lot more erratic. This is pretty fascinating given how his risk is so consistent. I think this just demonstrates how seriously he takes his risk management. These numbers are based on trades between 2014 and 2017. Since we know his account size, we can be pretty confident in these results. I have done a similar exercise for 1,500 of his trades between 2019 and 2022. But this is done on a relative basis. This was a huge eye-opener for me. I have not included the results of this in this presentation, but they are included in the full deep dive. To summarize, 7 out of 10 trades had a risk of less than 0.25%. 9 out of 10 trades had a risk of less than 0.25%. So in conclusion, you don't have to bet the boat on every trade. Also, 2 out of 3 winning trades accounts for 1/3 of the profits, meaning that 1/3 of all trades accounts for 2/3 of the profits. How you interpret that is up to you, but I think it is important to remember that you never know which trade will be a super profitable, and that there are diminishing returns on trying to find the optimal setups. When we do a similar analysis on trades between 2019 and 2022, the number shifts a little, and it was really instructional to see this. Also, please note that Kullamägi has some epic blowups and even more epic daily account gains. These are considered outliers and is not included in the dataset. As an example, in October 2014, he made $75,000 one day, only to lose $125,000 2 days later. So yeah, it can happen to the best of us. Now, onto some things which I haven't seen publicly discussed before, at least with any data backing it up. When Kullamägi enters and exits trades, just a quick note before we review the data, Kullamägi's entry criteria is based on range breaks and are not time-based, meaning the timings found in this data is an artifact of how entries and exits are distributed on the respective setups, and they should not be used as any sort of guidance on when to enter trades. However, the data and analysis has helped me understand some nuances and has given me a much better understanding of where my focus should be. That said, based on over 2,000 entries and exits, I found that almost 1/3 of trades was entered in the first 5 minutes. This is probably as expected for most people. 50% of entries are in the first 15 minutes, and 2/3 are in the first 30 minutes. It doesn't show here, but I have also done an analysis on the profitability of each entry time, which has provided some interesting findings. One should also be aware of the differences between different setups. With respect to exits, the data shows that 50% of exits happens after the first 90 minutes, which is also as expected. Let's continue with reviewing what I call exposure tempo. Now, many people are probably familiar with Mark Minervin's progressive exposure concept. It is the concept of testing the waters with some pilot positions before you jump in with both feet. Exposure tempo is similar, but refers to the speed at which you add or reduce exposure in the market. Let's look at Kullamägi's exposure tempo. Based on over 2,090 entries and exits, I found the following. 17% of his days, of more than 500, he had no net positions changes. This surprised me a lot. Almost 2/3 of days he has 2 or fewer entries, and in around 50% of the time his net position change is 1 or less per day. I don't know about you, but these numbers surprised me. It could be that I have been fooled by a very entertaining stream, but the numbers doesn't lie. This finding has impacted the way I approach adding and reducing exposure a lot. And again, this goes back to being able to actually listen to what Kullamägi says. Now let's look at a graph which blew my mind the first time I saw it. I charted Kullamägi's number of positions on top of QQQ to look at how he employed progressive exposure. And studying this chart in detail really made me appreciate the importance of progressive exposure and how it actually looks like for a successful trader. Many of today's traders, and especially members of the Kullamägi cult, started in the COVID bull market, including me. And I think we were fooled by how action-packed it was. But as Kullamägi says, most of the time trading is boring, and reviewing Kullamägi's exposure tempo adds credence to this statement. Okay, so let's look at what the practical implications of his position sizing, risk-reward profile, and exposure tempo is. How does his P&L curve look like, and what drawdowns does he experience? As you can see by the quote on the slide, Kullamägi estimates that he is in a drawdown 90 to 95% of the time in a normal market, and 80 to 85% of the time in a good market year. I have run the numbers on his own data and found that he is in a drawdown around 80% of the time. But, and it's a big but, this is based on his cumulative net profits. If you also include withdrawals for tax or similar, this gets worse. So, this only shows how mentally tough trading can be. Another insane fact is that Kullamägi, who has consistent triple-digit returns, was in a drawdown for almost 10 months in 2015. I just want to quickly mention another study I have done, which was really eye-opening for me. I used Kullamägi's trades for 2019 to 2022 and experimented with different position sizing and exit rules. This has a huge impact on the profitability. but also on drawdowns. I plan to publish this study later. So, that concludes the Qullamaggie deep dive findings portion of the presentation, and we will now continue with reviewing the method for data collection and analysis, the tools I have used, and lastly, I will tell you about some of the other exciting stuff I am working on. Let's start with the easy part, at least from a data collection perspective. So how I went about getting several thousand ticker mentions from his tweets was that I scraped all his tweets and then cross-referenced the text in the tweet with a list of listed and delisted tickers, and then printed the results in an Excel file. I then used my custom charting software to print the charts with the corresponding text. I also included some filtering and data structuring so that, for example, multiple tweets from one day was captured in the same chart. This data took me a lot of time to structure afterwards, as it required that I reviewed over 4,000 charts and categorized the setups. Now, let's look at where we got the most detailed data. This data is based on his own screenshots of his position holdings, primarily from Centerpoint. He has a lot of these on his Twitter account, but he also showed these in his first 55 streams, which were mainly recaps. So I took these screen caps and ran them through OCR, and then, after some data cleaning, got them into an Excel file. You can do a lot of data analysis on this data if you cross-reference it with something like his account size at the time. This will always be a little inaccurate, but I think most of the analysis results holds water. Now, this process may sound easy, but there was a ton of hours put into data cleaning and verifying dates. And then, this just shows what I discussed on the previous slide, that the first 60 or so videos were in a different format, and that we could take his recap videos and translate them into trades on specific dates. So, and then there were 492 videos on his typical streaming format. So, how did I get over 2,000 entries and exits from his streams? Well, what I did was that for each stream I took a screen grab at exact timings, like at the market open, then after 5 minutes, then after 15 minutes, and so on. I then clipped out the sections with his watch list for the day, his positions, and his back watch list. I then ran these screenshots through OCR and got them into an Excel file. And I then made some scripts which did different things. Like, for example, to find out when a new position was entered, I compared the subsequent position watch list with the previous and saw if there was a new position in the list. If it was, you know that he has entered a position at that approximate time. The exposure tempo data, how quickly he adds and reduces exposure, is also based on this data. And you can do a lot of analysis and visualizations with this data. This sounds like an easy thing to do, but this took forever. I would say I spent several hundred hours on this because there are so many things that go wrong, like something covering the watch list at the exact time, or when he has more than 25 positions and they don't show, or when he sorts it differently, and so on. Okay, so I know a lot of people create their chart books and setup collections manually. This takes way too long and is very, very inefficient. I have done this myself, but you end up spending more time creating your chart book instead of studying it. So, to remedy this, I created my own charting tool. The charting tool can be fed a list of tickers with entries, and it then spits out intraday, daily, or whatever chart I need for that specific study. It has been extremely helpful for me, especially for the EP deep dive I am currently working on. So, if you found this interesting and useful, I encourage you to check out my full deep dive, which also includes the complete data so you can perform your own analysis. You will get a lot of data on his trades. In addition to this, you will get Kullamaggie's own cumulative profits graph, his monthly account balance, all of his tweets. You will also get a transcript from all his streams. It's over 2.5 million words. I have found the transcript to be really useful because when I search for a specific term, like position sizing, you will find every time he discussed position sizing. I've also included various data analysis based on the trade data and also data for a QQQ chart, which you can plot in Excel. This is how I created the progressive exposure chart, and it is useful if you want to look at, for example, how big his backwatch list is during different markets. I have also included charts of all of his charts in a printable format, or as images so you can get them into your own chart book. It is a lot of information and a lot of data. I hope you will find it useful. It is the type of data I wish I had available when I started out. So, this has become a long presentation already, and this is the final slide. I want to end this presentation with a short discussion on some of the things I haven't included in the published deep dive, and also what other projects I am working on. One of the things which I haven't included in the data I have published is the results I have gotten from using Realtest on all of his swings. For those of you who don't know, Realtest is a backtesting software developed by market wizard Marston Parker. It is a pretty cool tool which I have used to evaluate optimal exit strategies and allocations. I have spent hundreds of hours working on this deep dive, and I have learned a lot from it. My next project, or actually I started working on this project before I started this deep dive, is an EP deep dive, or rather an earnings gappers deep dive. I have already started working on it, and I built a tool to help me build a comprehensive earnings gappers database for the last 25 years. It contains data for over 100,000 earnings dates. I have my own tool to filter for specific things, and with this I have a chart database with over 1,500 successful gappers. It is a great foundation for the rest of my analysis. Please do not hesitate to reach out if you would like to cooperate on this study. So that is all I had. I hope you find the data useful, and please reach out to me on Twitter or Discord if you have any questions. And if you're interested in doing your own deep dive, but skip the time-consuming data gathering process, check out the complete deep dive data on my Gumroad or Linktree page.